Welcome to the BioMedWire Podcast, powered by IBN. This original audio production delivers market and sector insights, as well as exclusive interviews with innovative executives shaping the future in fast-moving industries, and may feature a client partner of IBN or one of the 60-plus investor-focused brands within IBN's dynamic brand portfolio. As a multifaceted financial news and publishing company, IBN leverages its extensive distribution network, utilizing multiple proprietary corporate communication tools to introduce both public and private companies to a vast and diverse audience of investors, consumers, influencers, journalists, and other targeted segments of the public. IBN may have received compensation to produce this audio content. Please be sure to read IBN's entire disclaimers for full disclosures. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy the next revelatory episode of IBN's BioMedWire Podcast.
Welcome back, everyone. I'm your host, Stuart Smith, and this podcast is brought to you by the Investor Brand Network and the BioMedWire. And today I'm going to be speaking again with Dr. Christopher Schaber. He is the chairman, president, and CEO of Soligenix. The company's traded on the NASDAQ under the ticker symbol SNGX. Let's welcome Chris to the show. May I call you Chris?
Of course. A pleasure to be on the show. Thank you for having me again.
Hey, absolutely wonderful to be speaking with you again. Now, I know your last interview was with Carmel, but here at the Investor Brand Network, we're loving speaking with you and learning about your company. It's a robust newswire. So let me give that ticker symbol again, SNGX. Go to the company's website as well, Soligenix.com, Soligenix.com. And of course, visit us here at the Investor Brand Network. Click on the Clients tab. There in alphabetical order, you will find a big profile on this company. And speaking of big, we've got a big list of questions for you today, Chris. So buckle up, okay?
I'll do my best.
All right. Well, we appreciate that. So I'm going to go ahead and read some of these because we've got them from your shareholders. We got them from some of the writers that have covered your company as well. And it says you've recently completed the 50 patient threshold needed for the Flash 2 interim analysis scheduled for this quarter. What specific data points or trends will you be evaluating in that interim readout? And what constitutes a successful interim outcome from your perspective as the CEO?
Well, first, with that interim, what we'll be looking at is always safety, right? And making sure that the drug is safe, which we have no reasons to believe that it is not. It's shown safety in every study we've ever done. But it'll also be looking at efficacy primarily around the primary endpoint. When I say that, the data monitoring committee is unblinded and they'll look, but we remain blinded throughout the entire course of the study. So we're waiting for that read, and that read essentially will say, when you asked about, what would come from this, it would be, can you continue to enroll to the 80 patients, stop early for overwhelming efficacy, re-estimate sample size because your power calculation is slightly off, so you may need another 10 patients or so, or stop for futility. So we don't expect that after all the work we've done in the study, but the likelihood of getting a stop early or continue to enroll to 80, I think is of higher likelihood in what we're looking for coming this quarter from the data monitoring committee.
Excellent. Well, the blinded response rate to date has been reported at 48%, I believe, Chris, nearly double the anticipated 25% overall rate. How should investors interpret this figure given the blinded nature of the data? And again, Chris, I know you're speaking to your existing shareholders, but for those not familiar for your company as well, it might be good to kind of educate as we go along here, because I know this FDA process can be, to the novice investor in the biomed market and field, a little convoluted. I'm sure it's pretty convoluted for you and your team as well, but you're well seasoned at handling these tasks.
So maybe I'll take a step back then and just explain what that means, right? Because you touched upon it. So typically when you're powering a clinical study, right, part of that is saying, okay, what endpoint am I going to be looking at, and how many patients do I need to get there to show a significant difference, a statistically significant difference, a clinically meaningful difference. So when you do that, you're usually making assumptions based on previous data, as we've done. We did it based on a previous phase 3, because our first phase 3 was positive, hit its primary endpoint, and we had to conduct a second confirmatory phase 3, a replication study of longer treatment duration. So when we look at powering this study, so to speak, we said, well, based on our previous data, we'll conservatively say the HyBryte group, after 18 weeks of treatment, getting treatment twice a week for 18 weeks continuously, will have a 40% response rate in the primary endpoint. And the placebo, which we used from the prior phase 3, which was at 4%, we doubled it and rounded it up to 10% and said the placebo rate will be 10%. When you add those together, it's 50. You divide it by 2, it's 25% aggregate blinded response rate. And that's what we know, that's the blinded response rate. So when we provided that update at the 50 patient mark, as you noted a little earlier, the blinded aggregate response rate was 48%. So much higher than 25%. So what does that tell us? And what should it tell investors? I would say investors should be cautiously optimistic like we are, because what we know is with this product is the longer you treat, the better it works. And all our supportive studies have demonstrated that. So in this study, we're treating a little bit longer, right? And that's why we're pretty confident in that HyBryte is probably performing a little bit better than what we estimated. Placebo could, for fair bounce, could be performing a little bit better as well. But I think we're cautiously optimistic that HyBryte is doing what it has done in all studies, and it's doing it again here. And we're going to have a better understanding of that when that data monitoring committee does the readout in this quarter.
Much appreciated. Thanks for taking that step back and providing that context as well. So Flash 2 was designed with conservative assumptions, as you just pointed out, 40% response in the HyBryte arm versus 10% in placebo. If the interim analysis aligns with or exceeds these assumptions, and I think you just touched on this a little bit, what are the potential implications for trial continuation, powering, or regulatory discussions?
I think if you're talking about meeting or exceeds, meeting was we would continue to the 80 patients and we'd be done. Exceeds means that the response rate was better than we anticipated, and as we touched upon that as well. So we may be able to stop early. So I think when you're looking at meeting or exceeding, those are really the two parameters as it relates to the study. And so from that standpoint, the interesting position we are in here is back just in February, I gave another enrollment update that showed that we were at 66 patients enrolled of the 80 as of February 10th. So at the time of the interim, we're going to be pretty close to that completion mark as well, that 80 patient. I can't say whether it will be 70, 75, or the full 80, but we'll be pretty close. And so it really puts us in a nice position all around to be able to really say enrollment's complete, and this is when the top line results are anticipated. As I've noted, we anticipate top-line results in the second half of this year.
So the investigator-initiated study at Penn has shown a 75% response rate at 18 weeks. How does this external data set influence your confidence heading into the interim analysis and how it might factor into future regulatory submissions? And I think you might say cautiously optimistic.
No, it's a very good question because with that particular study, although the investigator-initiated study at University of Pennsylvania was to treat twice a week up to 1 year, because it was an open-labeled, unblinded, single-arm study, we were able to look at certain time points in the study. So as you would imagine, where you have a confirmatory phase 3 study that's enrolling and treating twice a week for 18 weeks, and then 18 weeks is the time point, it made sense to cut the investigator-initiated study at 18 weeks and says, how does that look, right? We're treating the same. It's the same patient population, very similar inclusion-exclusion criteria, same primary endpoint. And that's where that 75% response rate came. And that's why, as you noted, we're cautiously optimistic that the 40% is probably showing a little bit better in this study, based on what we had seen in the investigator-initiated study.
Well, let's change gears just a little bit. Let's talk about commercial outlook and strategic positioning now. You've reiterated expectations for U.S. peak HyBryte sales exceeding $90 million annually, with global opportunity approaching $250 million. Let's talk a little bit about how this timing of the interim analysis influences your commercial planning and potential partnership discussions with outsiders.
As you'd imagine, when you have an interim coming up, there's a lot of eyes on the company, a lot of eyes on the study, and it's no different for potential business development discussions, right? The companies that we've been in discussions with are looking to say, what is that interim showing, and where is this study going from here? Positive, obviously, there's a lot of momentum. And when you're a company our size, there's a lot of different ways you can partner. And from our standpoint, we're always first and foremost is get the drug to the patients as quickly as possible. Also, make sure we're maximizing value for our shareholders. That can come in the form of a merger and acquisition, a partnership, a regional partnership. So we really are looking at all strategic options and really discussing all potential options as we move forward, as well as commercializing in the United States ourselves, because this is a highly specialized rare disease. You don't need a large commercial footprint to really launch this effectively to capture, that larger revenue stream. So, we definitely keep that as an option for ourselves as we're evaluating all these potential business scenarios.
Well, as I mentioned at the outset, these questions were aggregated from social media submissions, blog writers. And so again, we've got an acronym in here. I'm going to ask the question and I'll ask you to clarify the acronym as well. But given the rarity of CTCL and the limited treatment landscape, how is Soligenix preparing to differentiate HyBryte, clinically and commercially if the confirmatory phase 3 results remain positive? So at the outset, what is CTCL and what's the rarity of it?
Yeah. So CTCL is cutaneous T-cell lymphoma. It is a rare and chronic cancer of the skin where you have patches or lesions that show up, very similar to psoriasis.
Okay.
In the early stages. If it advances to more severe forms where it's going systemic in the bloodstream, the lymph nodes, then it could ultimately manifest in tumors. And as you would imagine, your prognosis for survival is not very good there. If you can maintain early stage disease, keeping it in the early stage where it's predominantly skin, then you can live for years, if not decades with this. And there's no cure. Our therapy isn't a cure. You treat it, goes away, comes back again, a lot like psoriasis. So one thing that's interesting is that the safety of the therapy here is just as important, if not more important, than the efficacy. Because when you're living with something long-term, you need to be very sensitized to chronic exposure of a medication. The beauty here with HyBryte is that question touched upon is the safety profile is very benign. It is not a chemotherapeutic. It is not DNA damaging. So it follows a very safe pathway that doesn't affect the cells as greatly as chemotherapy. The light source we use to activate the drug, because what we do with HyBryte, we apply a gel to the lesions, then we use safe visible light to shrink the lesions on the skin. LED fluorescent. So we know that that's very safe. Current therapies out there either use DNA damaging drugs or ultraviolet light, which is the equivalent of sunlight. So imagine in a chronic setting, you're getting the equivalent of sunlight multiple times a year for many years. Your increased risk of developing melanoma goes up, right? That's why it has a black box warning in the labeling for increased risk of melanoma. So when the clinicians out there treating this specialized disease are looking at the landscape, what they've been seeing thus far are very caustic therapies that have varying levels of efficacy, but consistently safety concerns. And with HyBryte, you do not get any of those, which provides a very nice first-line safe option for patients. It also helps that HyBryte works very rapid, as we've seen in our previous phase 3 study, that it works equally as effective as not only the thinner patches, but the thicker plaque lesions on the skin. So, and that's due to the deeper light penetration in part, in the visible light and operating in the yellow to red region. So, we also benefit from very good efficacy in addition to this very strong safety profile. And that's why it positions itself very nicely as an early stage treatment in this disease.
All right. Well, let's change gears once again. Let's get into the operational side and aspect of the company and financial readiness. The next question says, your recent update noted a cash position of roughly 10.5 million and a non-dilutive NOL funding, net operating loss, of about $500,000. How are you prioritizing resources ahead of the interim analysis and top line results in the second half of 2026?
Great question. And currently, our cash position, cash on hand, gets us into the fourth quarter of this year. So through a lot of those important readouts, right, and endpoints and value drivers that we've discussed. For us, it's to prioritize first and foremost HyBryte. That's our lead asset. That's the confirmatory phase 3 study. It's to get that over the finish line. So that's where our focus lies. The beauty with how we built Soligenix is we are a very lean organization, but we're very hands-on in the way we manage it. We don't use large contract research organizations. So from that standpoint, we can manage our cash very effectively towards the programs that we need to execute. And that's what we've done through our entire existence as a company. And as I've been the CEO now for 18 years, building out this pipeline. So, we're positioned very nicely for that interim and for the things that follow based on the outcome of that readout. Obviously, you always remain opportunistic, and if there's business development activity that can bring in more non-dilutive capital, or we are to get favorable results and the stock price were to run, and there's an opportunity to bring in a little bit of capital from very well-known and established funds, always look to evaluate that and consider that. But where our cash is today gives us a nice runway to get where we need to get to for our current program.
Excellent. Well, once again, we're speaking with Dr. Chris Schaber. He is the chairman, president, and CEO of Soligenix, traded on the NASDAQ under the ticker symbol SNGX. Next question says, if the interim analysis is favorable, what are the next operational steps, manufacturing scale-up, regulatory meetings, or additional comparative studies that investors should expect in the near-term timeline?
A lot of that, right, that you've outlined. I think one thing that we'll be doing is starting our process validation. That's the manufacturing, where you're essentially scaling up your manufacturing process to get ready for commercial efforts. And you want to do that when you're a little bit more confident in what the outcomes of your study is going to be. Obviously, with the interim, we'll have that level of confidence, I believe. So we'll start that process validation. We have it pretty much teed up and ready to go. So it's a relatively straightforward trigger to pull for us. We'll also begin and continue with those regulatory interactions like we always do with the health authorities, and start, as we have been, compiling portions of a marketing authorization application that we could submit very quickly as we get that last data point. You want to be in a position where when you get that last data point, you're dropping it into an already established package and not wasting any time, so you can get it submitted as quickly as possible. So we're always kind of doing that work as well in the background. As far as comparative studies, we've done some in the past that have been very important. So in the immediate near term, 2026, not anything that would be new. We'll be providing updates on the existing that we had ongoing or recently completed. But probably as we go into 2027, 2028, as we're kind of in that commercial throw, then I think you'll then start to look at other comparative studies. But more importantly, also looking at what other disease indications synthetic hypericin, the active ingredient in HyBryte, could be utilized for, like mild to moderate psoriasis. So we're always looking to expand, grow, look at other indications that can build on a validated asset. And that's what we're hoping to do in the future with HyBryte or synthetic hypericin as well.
Well, very good. So let's go now to the corporate strategy, but also to the broader pipeline. And when I studied the news, this is one of my questions, because I noticed beyond HyBryte, your SGX 945 phase 2A program recently demonstrated biological efficacy. How do you balance the advancing of this pipeline asset while maintaining focus on the pivotal HyBryte program? So let's talk a little bit too. Again, we might need context on what is the SGX 945 and what is it going after?
So SGX 945 is a compound known as duscotide. It's not topical. You don't apply it. It's an injectable. It modulates the body's own innate immune system to reduce inflammation and clear infection. And we've done a number of preclinical, clinical studies that have demonstrated this concept, including the Behçet's disease study. That phase 2A study in Behçet's disease, which is an autoimmune disease that essentially causes exaggerated inflammation in the body, that manifests itself in oral ulcers predominantly in the mouth, but it could be in the skin, the eyes, the genitalia, very painful, chronic, again, no cure, right? You treat it, it goes away, you manage these flares. So with Duskite, the mechanism of action there and the pharmacology matched very well with Behçet's, which is an orphan disease, a rare disease. So that's why we looked at a phase 2A exploratory study, single arm, open label, for a proof of concept. Do we see activity? And that's what we had seen in that study. And then just to assure ourselves a little bit, we said, okay, what's the only approved drug out there in Behçet's disease for the oral ulcers only? And it's a very well-known product you see in a lot of commercials now, Otezla, or Apremilast. Mm-hmm. And when we matched our data, again, small numbers, but compared it to the Apremilast endpoints measures, the key measures in their phase 3, we matched very favorably. So the nice thing there is it's again, very similar to HyBryte. It's a very safe therapy. It's a therapy that can be used very early in the disease course. And because of the systemic nature, can hopefully, and we need to do more studies to show this, can affect all of the inflammation in the body, including the skin, the genitalia, have an effect on the broader ulcers that are developing. So at first go, the phase 2A was very promising, and we were very pleased with that. And we need to do a little bit more work on that to confirm that. To your next question is, HyBryte's the priority. First and foremost, it's HyBryte. We need to get to that interim analysis. And then, since I said we're so close to completing enrollment, although we'll be doing data cleanup and things of that nature, if all goes according to plan, there's not a heavy lift beyond that work. So we can start to then, as we get to the latter part of 2026 into early 2027, really start embarking on the Behçet's disease with the next phase of study. But first and foremost, it's to prioritize, get HyBryte over the finish line, and position Behçet's for that next phase of study through regulatory interactions and protocol design, things of that nature, so that we're at least positioned to pull the trigger in the future.
Well, very good, Chris. We'll let you go with this final question, which harkens back to our first interview with you, which, of course, viewers and listeners, you can go to Investor Brand Network. Again, click on that Clients tab, find Soligenix. You can find all of our write-ups, all of the news for the company, investment highlights, links to their website. Basically, it's a one-stop shop for Soligenix. Looking back at that first interview, you did emphasize disciplined execution and milestone-driven progress, which you have outlined and highlighted throughout this interview today as well. What do you see as the most critical inflection point for Soligenix over the next 12 months? And how does all the interim analysis that we spoke about today fit into that roadmap?
As you would imagine, as you alluded to, we've touched upon a lot of it, right? And it is a critical time for the company. We have that interim analysis, which is very important, coming this quarter, top line results the second half of this year. So those are really where the focus, those are some key inflection points and potentially transformational inflection points for the company, because it really allows us to start to embark on a process of moving towards commercialization and possibly partnership that comes along with that for HyBryte and cutaneous T-cell lymphoma. So that's where our focus lies, and that's where we're positioned. And the nice thing, I think, when you look at Soligenix here is, as we know, drug development is not without risk. There is always risk in drug development, no matter what phase of development you're in. But given the fact that we've done so many studies leading up to this confirmatory study, all positive, our first phase 3 study, positive, statistically significant. This study is just a replication study with an extended treatment duration, which we know the longer you treat with HyBryte, the better it works, right? Mm-hmm. And that's what we're doing now. We're treating a little bit longer. This is about, in my opinion, about as de-risked a development program as you're going to see in small biotech, maybe even in pharma. So from that standpoint, I think we're positioned nicely, but we need to hit those key inflection points, and it's the interim analysis this quarter, top line results with some additional publications and supportive data coming along the way in 2026. But quite a bit that's going to come around the HyBryte asset.
Well, Chris, I want to thank you for your time, your insight, and your candor regarding your company. It is a wonderful time, investors, listeners, viewers, to take a deep dive into SNGX, that's Soligenix. Chris, best of luck to you and your team for the rest of 2026, and of course, well beyond. We appreciate the work that you're doing. Godspeed in all fronts, and I know dealing with the FDA You talk about your 18 years experience, and I think that's experience that people will have to draw upon. And I'm sure your team that you surrounded yourself with as well as you navigate this landscape, because it is so important to get these, I'll use a baseball analogy. How about that? Since it's the World Baseball Classic, get them on, get them over, get them in. And that's what we need with HyBryte. So good luck to you with HyBryte and, of course, SGX 945. We'll speak to you again soon, Chris.
No, Stuart, thank you very much for the time. Always a pleasure.
Absolutely. For Dr. Christopher Schaber, this is Stuart Smith of the Investor Brand Network on behalf of the BioMedWire saying thanks so much for tuning in.
This release contains forward-looking statements within the meaning of Section 27A of the Securities Act of 1933, as amended, and Section 21E of the Securities Exchange Act of 1934, as amended. All forward-looking statements are inherently uncertain as they are based on current expectations and assumptions concerning future events or future performance of the company. Readers are cautioned not to place undue reliance on these forward-looking statements, which are only predictions and speak only as of the date hereof. In evaluating such statements, prospective investors should review carefully various risks and uncertainties identified in this release and matters set in the company's SEC filings. These risks and uncertainties could cause the company's actual results to differ materially from those indicated in the forward-looking statements.
The BioMedWire Podcast is an original content production powered by IBN, a multifaceted financial news and publishing company that delivers next-generation corporate communication solutions. Utilizing proprietary corporate communication tools such as news aggregation and syndication, social communication, and brand awareness techniques, among others, IBN introduces both public and private companies to diverse audiences to enhance reach and recognition. IBN may receive compensation for services and solutions provided to its client partners. You should assume that the owners, officers, and directors of IBN or financial analysts mentioned in this production may hold a position in and may intend to trade the securities in their own accounts. This production is not an offer or recommendation to buy or sell any securities that may be mentioned in this production. The information in this broadcast is presented solely for informative purposes and is not intended to be or should it be construed as investment advice. As in all investments, investment in the featured companies carries inherent investment risk. Listeners should review the companies thoroughly with a registered investment advisor or registered stockbroker. This production by IBN is not purported to be a complete study of the featured company or other companies mentioned. Information used in statements of fact have been obtained from featured companies and other sources but not verified nor guaranteed by IBN as to completeness and accuracy. Such information is subject to change without notice. Please see IBN's full disclaimers and disclosures at www.ibn.fm/disclaimer. Music in this episode is by Infraction. For more, visit inaudio.org.